All right, so today I want to talk about the Weck Method and see if there's really much practical application, whether it comes to just general fitness and then specifically when it comes to bodybuilding. Is there any specific hypertrophy benefits, since that's pretty much all we usually care about as bodybuilders. So if you're not familiar with the Weck Method, it's a really cool system from David Weck, who also invented the Bosu ball. The guys are down south from me. They're in San Diego. I've gone down there. I've done a couple certifications with them. I love David. I love Chris. They're great guys. They do some really cool stuff. And while it's pretty fun and it's interesting, it's good to switch it up, let's dive in and see if there's really some real tangible benefits that we can pull out of there and apply to our programming. And is there any way that we can apply the Weck Method principles and get some hypertrophy that we may not be gaining from using our traditional bodybuilding methods? Let's dive in and take a look. So if you're not familiar with what the Weck Method is, I'm going to give you a little bit of a generalization, but there's more to it. You definitely do a little bit more research on your own. But typically when you hear Weck Method, you're going to be thinking of the coiled core training of some variation typically, okay? So I figured maybe the best person to hear from about what the Weck Method is the creator, David Weck. So I went to his page and I tried to see if I could find a post kind of detailing his methodology, and this is one of the things I came across.
Figure 4, before the floor. If I can be here and then potentiate and then pull that through and get to that,
So this is him trying to kind of explain his thoughts on bouncing all quadrants, okay? I don't know if he's doing the best job of explaining it. It kind of looks like a giant fucking Big Bird dancing around, but he's an interesting guy. Let's keep watching. If you actually do look at this, what he's demonstrating is what coiled core is. He has his head over the foot. He is shortening one side. That is a bounce position, and you can do that from doing the other side as well if you go into the frontal plane. So he's kind of just demonstrating kind of what some of his training is. Not really explaining it that well, looking pretty silly doing it. So if you don't know anything about Weck Method and you just see this, you're probably like, the fuck is happening here? And this translates to great athletes, believe it or not.
I'm building spinal engine balance.
Spinal engine balance. He's so great. I love him.
Every step.
I also love that every single time you see David Weck on film, he has got at least one cold sore, usually 2 giant cold sores. He just doesn't give a fuck. I love him. He's such a lunatic. But I don't think that's very helpful to understand really what his method is at all. So let's go to one of his other practitioners. This is one of his instructors, Ed, and he kind of breaks down the spinal engine theory, which is basically what David Weck's whole Weck Method stems from. Okay? And really, the Weck Method is pretty much based off of the locomotive principles of the spinal engine theory. Okay, and this is what David really created a lot of his theory based around, was this book. And in it, it really breaks down how the spine is a power producer, a producer of force, not just a transmitter of force, as we are often taught by different strength coaches or physical therapists, etc. So the spine actually is able to produce a lot of force, and it does have a role on our locomotion. As we move, your spine really shouldn't be totally rigid. It is meant to move a little bit, and it can produce power on its own, as I said. And a great example of that is when we look at paraplegics who don't have the ability to walk on their own. You can see that they're actually producing their motion, their locomotive force, through their spine. And so we need to take that into account when we're doing movement, especially when we're moving through space. So there's some real benefits to getting your spine involved to help generate force and power. So the power comes from the spine. And here's an example of a high-level elite runner. David Weck will do these things a lot where he'll get a high-level athlete and show that naturally they're just doing his head over foot principles, which kind of falls into the coiled core and rotational movement training principles. And this is an example of a guy who you can see, he has side bending going on of his spine, his head is going over. And again, yeah, David's talking about this right here. Balance locomotion. All right, so we're gonna go through a couple of examples of kind of Weck Method principles in action in the real world. So again, he's engaging the spinal engine. Right here we have Randy Moss, the man. I grew up playing Madden with him. He was awesome, and it is just like a video game watching him in real life. So you can see right here, he definitely has the spinal engine going. You can see the head dipping over with the foot. You can see what they call the double down pulse. We also see that it applies even when we're not really moving fast, if we're just trying to transfer heavy force. And so for that, we use the example of like an extremely heavy farmer's carry using some stones as a strongman. So you can see he's not trying to stay neutral and move. He's letting his head go to the side and his ribs reciprocate as he's walking. And that's a relative motion. And that is going to really allow you to exert less energy than if you're just bracing, fighting this movement. You want to use that movement to your advantage. So these are some real world examples of how coiled core training and the Weck method is really applicable, especially in things that involve forward locomotion, movement in space. Now, when it comes to the weight room, it's maybe not quite as applicable, especially if we're doing like bilateral moves. And the Weck method does do some bilateral stuff, but it's not really like specific to it. What we're going to really dive into is the coiled core training and the rotational movement training. So here's one more example. On this, we have Rich Eisen on the one side in the suit running with what David calls the pedestrian theory, where the spine is neutral, head is not moving, and then we have an actual athlete using the spinal engine. So you can just see the difference. Nothing moving, straight line, head's moving, shoulders are moving. Obviously, you know, one of these is a high-level athlete and one of these has a lot of rigidity in his spine. So I don't think there's really any argument that having, like, being too rigid in your spine is a bad thing for an athlete, okay? And that does happen to a lot of bodybuilders. We do get really rigid in our spine too. So there are definitely some benefits to Weck method when it comes to that, but we'll cover that in a second. Let's talk about benefits specifically for hypertrophy, okay? So we're gonna specifically break down coiled core training and rotational movement training, because those are the main things that you think of when you think of the Weck method. And what coiled core training is, you're getting everything loaded up on one side. You're shortening the lat all the way, you're depressing the ribs, you're really loading up internal rotation on one side and doing work from that position. And then rotational movement training is coming out of that into the other and not just staying on that side. So either way, you're hitting that in range of that coiled core training position, but one of them you're moving through there and the other one you're usually just maintaining it. And this can be applied a lot of different ways. I'll show you what I'm talking about. I think there are some real beneficial applications, even to hypertrophy, when you use certain Weck method principles for certain body parts. So here I'm set up to do a lat pull, and this is a great example of where Weck method could be beneficial for hypertrophy is in your lat development. And I just asked my buddy the other day who's familiar with Weck method, I go, hey, I'm gonna make a video on Weck method and any benefits for hypertrophy. Like, what do you think? Is there anything you can think of? He goes, I like it for lats. And that is so intuitive. Using this Weck method kind of movement pattern to really shorten your lats feels really good. It's something that I did intuitively before I ever heard what Weck method was. I used to get on a cable, reach out, and I would pull, and I would dip to the side and kind of drop down. I really felt a good contraction whenever I would do that. Well, that's essentially doing a rotational movement from Weck method. And so in this first exercise, I'm positioning myself in the most stable position possible, which happens to be like in a coiled core position. I'm gonna maintain that as I'm doing a lat pull. So this is a really good way to build up your lats. I think that there are some really good hypertrophy benefits to doing Weck method training for your lats through this coiled core training kind of position. So you can see I'm getting a good stretch around the ribs. I can turn this into an overloaded negative really easy too by using that other arm. And I'm really getting it fully short and really isolating the lats. So I really love Weck method stuff for your lats. And we're gonna go through a couple of examples of how it can be really beneficial. So overloaded negatives is one of my favorite ways to incorporate it. Here, I'm in a kind of a coiled core position, because that's gonna give me the full shortened position of that lat. It's just the most natural, stable position. So I'm doing like a single arm overloaded lat row, again, helping on the negative, which is something I love to do for lats. If you can't tell, I love to do overload negatives. And I'm doing this with a cuff, so I don't have to hold the thing, but this is a coiled core position. Again, this is something I would do even if I didn't know what the Weck method was. That's where I'm most stable, and it's where I feel the best stretch and the best shortening of the lat. And then from here, I'm gonna go right into a superset utilizing that same technique I did earlier with the coiled core lat pull. Same exact setup, using that overloaded negative. Again, one of my favorite moves, and my lats have come up a lot in recent years, and I do credit some of this type of stuff from the Weck method for that. All right, here's an example of how people kind of naturally use a rotational movement pattern in the gym to help target their lats on a hammer strength row machine. I see it often, and I like to do it a lot too. And I'm kind of over exaggerated on this, but a lot of times you don't have to do that. Sometimes you just get that little dip, helps get that little depression of the humerus, and you're going to get more lat. But on this, I'm throwing that arm over to really help kind of drive that intention downward on the left side. And I'm really getting a good lat pull. And I'm using some pretty heavy weight on here. That's one of the good things about this, is you can really almost do like an overloaded negative on your own by generating that force from that spine movement and then controlling it real slow on the way back. So this is something I do really often at the gym. And this is one of my clients, and this is, again, a setup that we just do without even thinking about Weck Method. So again, one of my favorite ways to hit lats is to do this, and that's probably the biggest benefit from any of the Weck Method training, is the ability to really shorten your lats. Another example, using the cable. And this is kind of similar to the move I was saying earlier. If you can't connect your lats, you try that, you'll definitely feel them. And another setup for the straight arm lat pull. Now, there are some other potential benefits for hypertrophy from the Weck Method. And I mean, kind of like this, I'm just using kind of a coiled core positioning to be as stable as possible as I'm doing this movement. And this is like it's really kind of like a one-arm tricep move. I'm really just loading that left side. The right one's just kind of there for stability. So this setup allows me to drive as much force as possible through there. As if something else where I'm a little more neutral, I'm going to be spending more time stabilizing, not getting as much tension on the actual muscle. So sometimes it's just it just tends to be the naturally most stable position, and that's where the benefit lies in something like this. Now, something I do often on my own is I do alternating or reciprocal movements. And here I've got these 120s. I'm gonna do some alternating overhead presses with these. And I wouldn't consider this Weck Method, but Weck Method practitioners would. They say this is Weck Methodized because I'm doing an alternating move. And what do you see? I see the reciprocation in the ribs, and you'll see the head moving a little bit. And this is actually helping me do more weight. I'm doing 110, 120, these are 120 pounds right here. I couldn't just sit there and bilaterally press 120 like this. This looks even more impressive because it's single arm, but it's actually easier. So you can see I'm gonna use my spine as something that's gonna help me produce force to get that weight up. So again, you see a little of the lateral flexion. Again, it's not gonna be a crazy amount. This is heavy weight. I do need to have some kind of a brace in there, but my head's going side to side. Technically, you could call this an RMT exercise if you were looking at it through a Weck Method kind of lens. Again, I'm not necessarily doing that, but you could. And so again, this could be really beneficial. If you are doing any alternating movements and rotational movement training is your introduction to that, then great. Weck Method is awesome for that. The other last benefit I could really think of for hypertrophy when it comes to Weck Method is potentially your quads may have some hypertrophy benefits. And the reason I'm saying this is because a lot of people work their quads in a way that they think they're hitting their quads, but they're really not loading through really good internal rotation. They have to kind of get like weird foot positions to create internal rotation. That tends to take tension off the quads and put it more, a lot of times, on the adductors, on the glutes. So there's certain Weck Method coiled core protocols that you could do that could like line you up in a way where you can get more internal rotation and maybe more like vastus lateralis activation, more meat, more sweep activation on your quad. And he also has a tool called the Weck Deck. And I use the Weck Deck a lot because it lines you up to get better IR, and you can automatically feel way more on the top of your thighs, on your quads, where we all really want that meat. And so here's an example of me using the Weck Deck to do a pretty heavy squat. I've got 365 on here, and this is the Cybex Smith machine, so this is heavy. It's not like an on-weighted one. And using this Weck Deck just really sets me up in a way I can real comfortably get down and really isolate my quads. It's a little different than like using a wedge because it's not like angled down. It's kind of angled to help me pronate a little bit. And that enables me to really drive through IR hard and get more out of my quads. Like, this is a really comfortable squat position. I wouldn't look quite as good without the Weck Deck. At least not driving that kind of internal rotation through the quads. I'd probably be a little wider, feet maybe slightly out to get this kind of depth. So I love the Weck Deck. You can go heavy on it, and that could potentially help you get some quad development. And you could also kind of set it up for like a Bulgarian using the Weck Deck, or even not even using the Weck Deck in a coiled core setup. And I'll show you that later. I think that's gonna pop up. And those are two ways that could really benefit you getting some quad hypertrophy. So When it comes to benefits from hypertrophy, mainly I see the benefits towards lats development, really able to get a full shortened contraction on there and really able to connect with that muscle by doing some of their coiled core and rotational movement training for that. I think you can get some real good benefits if you're not doing any alternating movements. I look at that through kind of a Weck Method lens, rotational movement, letting those ribs move, whether it's like a press or whether it's like an alternating row, like a pull down, letting your head go. And I think there are some benefits for hypertrophy when it comes to your quads, especially if you use the Weck deck. Now overall, is there a lot to add as a bodybuilder for hypertrophy purposes? I mean, maybe not. I do think you should add some of the lat stuff, and I do think you should do reciprocal training, although I don't think that's really Weck Method by nature. The main benefits you're gonna get from doing the Weck Method as a bodybuilder or just an average gym goer is you're going to get out of your spine, first of all. You're gonna really kind of improve your mobility, and that can kind of go two ways. That could be maybe you're just really stuck in your back, and doing some of the Weck Method stuff is gonna help you get out of it a little bit. Or maybe we're really asymmetrical and stuck on one side, and doing some of the rotational movement training or the coiled core on the other side can kind of help fix your imbalances and get out of being stuck on that one side. And for general fitness, Weck Method stuff is great. So I'm just gonna show you a couple examples of what I was talking about and how I've implemented it with myself and some of my clients. So a lot of this might be considered like cardio, which would be like the third benefit of a lot of the Weck Method stuff is you can do kind of a form of cardio that's not boring, and depending on what method you're using, you could be doing things that are actually gonna have a positive effect on your parasympathetic nervous system, which most cardio does not. So let's check it out. All right, so here's some RMT stuff I'm doing on the Weck deck. Here's one of my clients just doing some Landmine U stuff. Now, Landmine University is a spin-off of Weck Method. You can see we're doing the coiled core, rotational movement training. A lot of times I do this as movement prep, and often for someone who's just stuck in their back, I just like to do this as like a form of cardio to get them loose at the same time. And here's some coiled core training on the deck. You can see I'm staying locked down on that one side. Again, here's kind of almost a therapeutic benefit. I'm helping my client find her internal rotation on that right side, doing some stiff leg deadlifts on there, driving more IR than I would be able to if I wasn't using the deck. And that's a coiled core position. Here's an RMT move. Again, this is great stuff for general like fitness. If you're a bodybuilder, you might not be doing that, but I like this for cardio a lot. This is a RMT swing. This is a little bit of a blend of an elastic limit hold, which is a move from Weck Method, with a RMT. And again, I really like to do this to help people find internal rotation. Now, this is an example of what I was talking about. Like if you want a hypertrophy benefit for the quads, you can set up for a Bulgarian split, but do it this setup where we're coiled on one side. You got the one hand flipped in, the one shoulder's lower than the other. This is gonna drive more IR, even if you don't have the Weck deck, and you'll get more out of the thigh, out of the quad, out of the vastus lateralis muscle. Here I am playing around doing some stuff I wouldn't recommend most people doing, but I do weird stuff and I get benefits from it. This is another setup you can kind of do to get more quad. This one's an RMT though, she's coming out of it. And again, here's a lat move. And sometimes what I'll tell my clients is you should be able to pick up that back foot. I think that's what I just told her, because you want to be like 100% stable on one leg. That's what a lot of the RMT and the coiled core training is finding that stability on one side. So that would be considered RMT, rotating into it. Here's an elastic limit hold. I like these to warm up a lot. And this is a coiled core move. I do a lot of leg stuff on here. After I've done like heavy stuff, I kind of like to do Weck Method stuff for my legs. And like I said, probably the main benefit you're gonna get from using Weck Method, whether you're a bodybuilder or just an average gym goer, is the improvements to your mobility. This can just be getting you out of excessive extension in general, getting your spine to move. A little lateral flexion a lot of times makes you feel a lot better. But you can also address your specific imbalances, like I said, on one side. So here's a couple examples of how I incorporate that myself and with some clients. So a lot of times I'll fall under what's considered more of a traditional left AIC, right BC pattern, meaning I'm kind of like stuck on my right side and my left wants to kind of flare open. And so in order to counter that, I do a lot of Weck Method stuff, kind of blending it with PRI concepts in my warm-ups to kind of get my sacrum in the right position, get my rib cage and my pelvis aligned the best I can before I start my heavy bilateral loading. So here's a few ways that I incorporate that. So this is a GHD, and then typically if you're left AIC, you're gonna have a little bit harder time activating that left hamstring. Like that left heel is gonna not feel as connected to the back of the foot pad as the right. And so if you do it like an elastic limit hold and rotate that way and really pull down, that little bit of that rotation is gonna line you up and you're gonna get better left hamstring activation. And that's gonna be a real good way to kind of prep your system. And so I'll stay there for a few reps and then I'll go into rotation. You don't have to only stay there, but I might go back and forth. But when I go to the right side, it's pretty much always about getting out of it. Whereas on the left, I'll stay there a few extra reps. And again, because that's my body's way more comfortable going to the right, I don't really need to learn how to stay there, but I do need to learn how to get out. So here's another example. I'm using the rope to try to fix some of my imbalances. So what I'm doing is I'm stepping on a small platform on my left foot, and that's to make it easier to facilitate left AFIR. I'm trying to get internal rotation in there, but specifically from my acetabulum position on my femur, not from my femur on my acetabulum. And naturally, I'm way better at that on the right. So I'm doing this on the left, and then I'm doing what's called a dragon roll, which is giving me right trunk rotation, which are two really big things we go after in PRI. Here's another example. I'm kind of doing the same thing, but now I'm working another imbalance, my glenohumeral internal rotation coming from underhand on the right. And here's an example of using the coiled core more on the left, like I said, to kind of line things up, to get better at being on the left side. And then when I'm on the right, again, it's more about being off of the right. And you don't want to only stay on the left and not come off. You do want to come off because part of the problem is getting off of the left side from like a deep position of internal rotation. So there are benefits to coming off, but mainly I'm going to stay coiled on that side. Whereas on the right, I'm pretty much always alternating to get off of that side onto the left. I could hang out all day just holding up on the right side, just doing coiled core on the right. Here I am using the Weck deck in a way that's going to kind of set my hips up to use the musculature that they would prefer not to, essentially. So in this position, I'm more like pushing off of that right leg onto the left. So I'm getting more of this left inner thigh, getting more of this glute abduction muscle. So I'm kind of setting up the opposite from the way that my body would prefer to do. I'd much rather push off my left onto my right side. And I'm really into IR on the left, more ER position on the right. This isn't really Weck. This is just a PRI move, but you can kind of see how they blend together. It looks very similar to a coiled core position. And like that's one of the good things about really good systems, they blend together. So this is just another example of doing some prep work. Instead of using the kettlebell, this time I'm just using the band, but this was before a leg day the other day. And again, I'm really driving hard through the inner part of my feet on this left. A lot of the problems that when I see people do Weck methods, sometimes they just are trying to bounce. You need to be in a position of internal rotation. You need everything to be doing what it's supposed to do. You need to have intent behind what you're doing, not just trying not to fall. And so then again, when I'm on the right side, I'm all about shifting over. Here's an example of what I did earlier using the band on the GHD. I have a client using this on the hyper. So this is a client of mine who actually has scoliosis. And so when we do coiled core training to one side, it really bounces her out. Like she looks even here. If she wasn't doing this, one hip would look all crazy different. One of her butt cheeks would look bigger. This really lines her up in a good way. So we do a lot of this kind of stuff. All right, so we've got the minimal hypertrophy benefits, but definitely someone that comes to lats, potentially someone that comes to quad. They have the benefits to doing the coiled core training, rotational movement training, just to get you out of excessive extension and also to get you out of being stuck on one side, how to fix your own imbalances. And the third main benefit I would say is just cardio. Like I mentioned, there's some really potentially good benefits to doing Weck method types of cardio if it's really low impact and kind of low intensity, that it can have a positive impact on your parasympathetic nervous system, can lower your cortisol. When these are things, especially when we're dieting, especially when we're competing, that are like ramped up and we are like in fight or flight mode. So anything we can do to get that to chill, especially if we're like burning calories, that's great. And there's also potential for this to boost your metabolism. So it's not gonna wear your body down, but we do look a little silly doing it. So I'll kind of show you what I mean. And the good thing about this is just fucking fun. Cardio should be fun. I hate sitting on a Stairmaster. I hate, doing a treadmill. All that's super boring. I do this kind of stuff. Time flies by. I only go for about 20 minutes and I'm like a nice sweaty mess, but I'm not exhausted. I'm not beaten up. So I'll show you kind of a couple examples of what I like to do for Weck method cardio. And again, you can make it more intense and do a little bit more stuff with weights potentially, or more of the landmine, but then you're gonna probably lose some of the benefits of like lowering your cortisol and the parasympathetic nervous system. But those are really great for cardio too, that are gonna help benefit your mobility at least. So here's some different examples of how I incorporate Weck method for cardio. So I really like the clubs. And I mean, this is only like a 2-pound club. They go up to 8 pounds. I usually keep it light. And again, this is gonna really give you some benefits of getting out of your spine, getting comfortable with your pelvic rotation. And you know, it's fun. This is usually how I'll warm up. I'll just kind of do like a specific pattern, kind of feel where it's different. Like when I'm doing this, I have to really be conscious of my left rib dropping when I'm coming back over. And then we're gonna switch the pattern, and there's always like one that's a little easier on one side than the other. So this is cool, this is fun. I feel good doing this. My body likes it, my brain likes it. I turn on some like gay techno music or some old school rap music and I just go. And again, I'm not gonna be like burning a ton of calories, but I'm not the kind of guy that has to do a ton of cardio. So for me, 20 minutes of this 5 days a week is plenty. And then you can get a little fancy, you can get a little weird with it. You can act like you're like a ninja or you're like a Viking, which is always cool if you're a dude. I don't know, I guess girls like to be ninjas and Vikings too. Vikings were very pro-feminine, they were feminine Vikings. Here I'm using some landmine stuff. So again, like I said, you can use some of this for cardio too. You just might not get the benefits of like getting your system to chill. I love using this for my older guys because it gets so stuck in their spine. This is a great way to encourage some of that lateral motion. Here I'm just doing some more RMT. So on this day I was just using the landmine for a little bit of cardio. Check out Landmine U if you want to see more of this stuff. And here's one of my clients, we're doing kind of like a full body explosive workout and we're just doing some of this Landmine U stuff. More club stuff. And what's funny is like where I'm at, behind me, there are people that like walk around there, walk their dogs, they're up on the sidewalk there and they like look down at me and they're like, what the fuck is this madman doing? And I'm just glad that I'm in some kind of like decent shape because I don't look as ridiculous as if I was like some fat ass just doing this. But I mean, I do look pretty dumb, but I don't care. But again, as I'm at a gym by myself, but I still wouldn't care if I was at a gym with other people. So the clubs are probably like my favorite thing to do currently. I really am having fun with them, but I also love the rope. I'm not very good at the rope. There are some people that are freaking amazing. You'll see them a little bit later. But the rope flow is a really cool tool that David Weck invented. And I wish I was good at it. I would like get rid of all my muscles if I could be good. So I'll show you what I'm talking about once I get done swinging this sucker around. Oh, almost look like I know what I'm doing, but I'm totally clueless. All right, so here's me using the rope a little bit. You can't really see from this angle, but again, this is like a reciprocal movement pattern. I'm moving in different planes. I'm making sure that I'm really set on each foot. As I rotate, it's like I'm really bounced on each side, and the rope will give you that automatic feedback and make you bounce or you'll smack yourself. And I'm not good at the rope at all. You know, I still have a lot of extension patterning, but you see some of these guys that do the rope and it's freaking like mesmerizing. I could totally see how you can get into such a flow state doing that. Even me doing this little shitty one, I'm in a little bit of a flow state. look, I almost look like I have rhythm, but I don't. I can't dance at all. And rope's getting a little bit popular. There's been more people doing it now. I see Juju Mufu. I see the guy from Mark Bell's podcast always doing it. You can make it plyometric. You can make it kind of dynamic too if you want. Just another little bit of me kind of messing around with it. We won't watch this whole thing, but again, it's just fun. Even if you're not good, it's fun. So I really recommend giving it a shot. It's really important to kind of do non-bodybuilder things sometimes as a bodybuilder. Super important. You know, we get so compressed in certain areas and so restricted that just getting your body to move in a little different way can provide a lot of benefits that actually like cross over towards staying healthy and potentially even towards being better at building muscle, at enhancing hypertrophy. So you can just see the rope a little better on this one. That's why I'm kind of letting it go. But again, I suck. I should not be any kind of an example on what you should look like with this. All right, what do we got here? I don't know what else I got. So again, just some like lower intensity cardio, a little bit of a mix of RMT and CCT. Again, I have no weight on the landmine because I'm just doing this for cardio, but you can really load that up. Using some of this steel mace. My back felt a lot better. I remember I was tight that day and I just was like, you know what? I need some rotational work, some lateral flexion. There's another one of those elastic limit hold. Here I am having some fun doing some pistol squats. Again, a lot of this shit most bodybuilders aren't going to do. They're not going to benefit from, but I like it. I do a lot of weird stuff and I think I do benefit from it. So just because it looks weird, don't be afraid to try it. This isn't something I do often. I'm hanging with one of my girl clients. Again, just doing some of the landmine for cardio. Basic stuff. Easy. I think we went through that enough. Let's see if there's anything else worth checking out. Here's what I call my Viking training. Actually, someone else called it, but I thought that was good. A little mix of kettlebells and clubs. I got to bring that back. I haven't really tried it lately. I'm a lot better with the clubs now. I could probably do some cooler stuff. Silly? I know, but I like it. All right, so I showed you some ways that I use it and the ways that I use it with my clients, but I'm not good at it. I suck at Weck Method stuff, I'm not gonna lie. So I wanna show you a couple people that are really good at this stuff. They'll look much better, but it's also kind of a good example of how like maybe it's not the best for hypertrophy. If you're really just focused on building muscle, then maybe Weck Method doesn't provide the most benefits, but I will say there are benefits that go along that may not have to do with hypertrophy, it can do with the way you present your muscle as well. So if you're just stuck in your back, that's not a very good look. You're not gonna be able to get very good lats, you're not gonna like display detail very well. So even if you don't get hypertrophy benefits, the movement benefits may give you the ability to present your body better as well. These are two guys that get a lot of attention, that practice a lot of the Weck Method stuff. First is Chris. He's probably he's the main coach. He's down there in San Diego running the programs. He's a fucking monster. I mean, he is strong, he is athletic. He's not giant at all. He's not a big guy, but he's super strong. So I'm gonna show you kind of what elite Weck Method programming looks like and what like an elite Weck Method athlete would look like. Yeah, he's gonna make me look like shit on the rope. Chris is really good. I mean, he's a fucking monster with everything. So yeah, I mean, imagine how much more fun you would have doing it if you were good like this. Nothing's that fun when you suck at it, and I kind of sucked at the rope for a long time, so it wasn't like super fun, but even when I sucked, it was kind of fun. But man, to be like this, I really would love to be able to do this. Yeah, so you can see, like I said, Chris is not a big guy, but he has got really fluid movement. And he's a super interesting guy, great to talk to. I could watch this for fucking hours. You guys probably can't, so we'll go through it. All right, so here he is using what, like an 80-pound kettlebell for a flow. And you can see there's a lot of built-in coiled core, rotational movement stuff. And you can see he's a fucking animal. 80 pounds is a lot to be throwing around like that. All right, here's an example of him just using some pretty good power. I forget how much weight that is, but he does 500 pounds later. Some box jumps. So it's a pretty well-rounded athlete. Here's him using some of the coiled core training like I was, but he's using the Bosu balls instead. And when they go bilateral, a lot of times they'll do what's called like external torsion, which that kind of was, really trying to get the lats to contract. Yeah, a lot of Weck Method stuff looks pretty silly though, but I can see the reasoning behind it, but yeah. All right, what else we got? So here's a 500-pound lift right here. And I mean, fuck. I mean, I could pull 500, not super easy right now, but I could do it, but I'm a lot bigger than this guy. Weck Method, they're really big on the bent arm press, because that's kind of like coiled core position. That's heavy as shit. Again, Chris is a fucking beast. But you're not gonna look like a bodybuilder if you're just practicing Weck Method stuff. And again, it allows you to do cool, weird, athletic stuff like this, but you're not gonna be super jacked. Unless you're Samoan. So this is Keanu, who is a fucking monster. He's a real popular IG fitness guy who does a lot of Weck Method stuff. And I think that this guy would be jacked as shit even if he did Pilates, so I wouldn't really credit that with his physique. I think he's got some really crazy genetics. But he's a good example of someone with crazy genetics for just size and athleticism, put him to use in a Weck Method style programming. So let's check him out doing some stuff. These are some big boys. I don't know what these are, but he throws around like some heavy ass kettlebells. Yeah, I mean, these are definitely like over 100, and he's just tossing them overhead like nothing. So this isn't exactly like Weck Method, I would say. Although it is natural. You see how you naturally get that coiled core? Like, that's the thing about Weck Method stuff, is it should happen naturally. And here we are doing some of the landmine heavier stuff. Landmine you saw me do pretty light. Again, that's all Weck Method right there. Yeah, I mean, Keanu's a big fucking boy. He's a big cat. He's athletic too. He's definitely bringing a lot of positive attention to Weck Method because he's such a fucking beast. Yeah, this is the kind of moves that MMA fighters do a lot. Angela Hill trains down there. They have a lot of jiu-jitsu artists, so this is some coiled core RDLs. Nice. And there's a lot of benefits to this because a lot of us don't drive internal rotation good, and this will help. always approaches kettlebell so chill. Like, you never see him get super amped up. The most you ever see him do is like a little head nod. Like, he's so like chill. I mean, fucking for a guy that big, those are pretty good, awesome Nordics. There's more landmine stuff, kind of incorporated in the band. And again, he probably gets weird looks, but he's jacked as shit. People aren't gonna say nothing to him at the gym. A little more plyometric athletic stuff. Weck Method. That's another big Weck Method move right there for the row. Here we go. This is a big guy. This is a 202-pound kettlebell this motherfucker's just throwing up. For what, 3? Yeah, that's pretty impressive. I ain't moving that. 202. Overall, if you're interested in the Weck Method, make sure to follow their IG, follow Chris, follow David Weck, look a little bit more into it. Like I said, there's more to it besides just the coiled core training and the rotational movement training, although that is primarily what they're known for. If I were to come up with any specific criticisms I have of the Weck Method, I would say that sometimes, and it's usually like, it's obviously gonna be people that aren't like really good or experienced practitioners of it. They kind of like, they get too into like the side bending and they're really not doing the nuances of it. I see a lot of people like tilting their whole body or just getting in funky positions. It's supposed to be a very stable position. You shouldn't feel unstable. And I think sometimes people like Weck Methodize certain movements like too much to where like they're getting like less benefits if they just did it kind of normal. And I think the main issue with probably any of the Weck Method stuff is that there's just not enough focus on like bilateral neutral spine being stable, because that's what's going to drive, you know, your muscle the most. Everything they do that's bilateral is usually like extreme extension, which sometimes is totally fine, but for muscle building purposes and for like longevity purposes. And again, the Weck Method guys, they go into extreme extension, they go into extreme flexion too. They're balanced out, so it's like they're not hurting themselves at all. But someone who's not as good at practicing that internal torsion that they do or the RMT stuff, they lift with that much bilateral extension, they might have some issues. But in general, I do think if you're more neutral spine, when you're lifting heavy, you'll put more tension on the muscles. And that's something that they just don't really do. For whatever reason, David is so against a neutral spine. I do think there's benefits to it. He hates the power press. He hates being rooted to the ground, when sometimes that's exactly what you need as a wrestler, as a offensive lineman. Like, sometimes you need to be able to produce force into the ground and not be moved. So I do think he goes a little too far and tries to make everything into this coiled core rotational spinal engine theory thing, when that's kind of its own thing and plays a role in athletics and muscular development, but shouldn't be like the foremost thought all the time necessarily. But overall, I love David, and I think everything he does is pretty good for the industry. I think he's a good thing for the industry as a whole, for sure. So just to recap, like I said, the main benefits you're gonna get from doing Weck Method stuff is you're gonna improve your mobility, potentially get out of extension, which is really great, especially for bodybuilders. You can also potentially improve your mobility by being able to improve your reciprocal gait and getting out of one side. And a lot of that has to do with facilitating things that we go after in PRI, whether that's right trunk rotation, left hip internal rotation, left rib depression. These are all things that we can really target using Weck Method principles that can help our imbalances and get us more prepared to lift heavier. And also cardio benefits from doing Weck Method stuff. Not only going to get the mobility benefits, but like I said, you also may increase your metabolism. You could decrease your fight or flight response, decrease your cortisol. And there are some hypertrophy benefits to it, potentially for the quads, but especially for the lats, I really believe. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of info about Weck Method. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please let me know. All right, thanks.